Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Today in Manufacturing podcast. With me this week are Jeff Franke and Anna Wells. We each have more than 15 years of experience covering the manufacturing industry. Every week, we take the 5 most popular stories on our websites like Industrial Equipment News and Manufacturing.net and discuss the implications they have on the industry going forward. Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use, or just sharing it with a friend. If you'd like to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, David, or Anna at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first, and subscribe to us on YouTube at IEN Magazine so you can join us every Thursday when we go live. Jeff, how are you doing this week?
I'm great, David. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I like the constant evolution of the podcast desk because there's like a new edition every week, and it like just makes it incrementally better. I'm liking it. I'm liking the upgrades.
Yeah, I do like the new microphone stands, but I'm still getting used to them. Like once in a while, I'll just catch something out of the corner of my eye. I think it's like dropping or something. So see some weird reflex during the course of that. It's just me being weird.
You're scared of it?
I'm not scared. I just for some reason think it's dropping.
Sounds like you're scared of it.
No, for me,
I'm afraid of anything.
Well, that's clear. No anxiety whatsoever. I saw the microphone here and I'm just like, oh, everything's fine. Open my computer and just, kind of bash the stand. But, it's really coming together. I like it, Anna. It's a great job.
Really looks good.
Yeah. And whatever sort of off-gassing from the stain seems to be done too. And that's nice because I don't feel like I have a contact buzz just sitting next to it anymore. But I kind of like that,
VOC free podcast this week.
Very good. Very good. Well, before we jump into our first story this week, we have a new word from our new sponsor, Velocio. This week's episode is brought to you by Velocio. The digital transformation landscape is constantly changing, whether caused by unprecedented events or emerging technologies. This new guide will teach you how to manage these disruptions by building agile and, quote, resilient strategies. Download a business leader's guide to digital transformation right now to receive the ultimate resource for leaders to spring ahead of competitors. Jeff, this one sounds like a winner.
Couple of huge topics there. I mean, business continuity, digital transformation, those are two huge critical issues right now throughout the industrial sector. So makes sense.
Like an easy icebreaker whenever you go to a trade show. So where are you at in your digital transformation journey?
That's a good one.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
Doesn't send people spiraling like, well, we're kind of trying to do this, and then we're over here.
Oh, do we have to start it? Yeah. Okay, I'll try it at the next trade show. See which one's better.
I wouldn't lead with that.
No?
But your call.
Well, I mean, I've led with worse.
I've been there.
All right. Our first story this week, PepsiCo closing 4 bottling plants. Last week, PepsiCo announced plans to shutter 4 bottling plants in the United States. The company will also lay off some 400 workers as the company is looking to improve efficiency. The closures include Cincinnati, where 136 workers will be out of a job, Chicago, adding another 131, Harrisburg with 127, and less than 50 in Atlanta. The only plant that will fully close is Chicago. Sales, delivery, and warehouse functions are still going to continue in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Employees will be paid and receive benefits for 60 days, though some will still be required to work during that time. PepsiCo lowered its forecast earlier this month as sales for drinks and snacks fell following years of price increases. And the company said it was going to get more efficient and productive. But did you think they were going to cut this much so soon?
Yeah, it was a big cut. I think there's a few things going on here, but one of those things is since we ran the story, we've since learned that the Teamsters local chapter 727 in the Chicago area has filed a federal lawsuit against PepsiCo for the abrupt shutdown of this warehouse. Mm-hmm. So the union represents more than 75 employees at the plant. And they say that many of them were not aware that the facility was going to shut down until they came to work on that Monday morning and were told basically to pack up and go home.
Yeah.
So the union leaders are calling the effort an unlawful intent to close, and they say that it's violating the WARN Act, which, as we know, is a requirement for companies that have a certain number of employees to provide 60 days advance notice of a closure or mass layoff. The union has also accused PepsiCo of not paying the workers the money to which they are entitled with their severance package. They say they failed to calculate in overtime, premium pay, and other benefits. Pepsi, for their part, has denied this. They say they are complying with WARN by paying the workers for the next 60 days. They are contending that they're not requiring any of these workers to work during this time.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to that WARN Act lawsuit, the Teamsters 727 has also filed an unfair labor practices charge with the NLRB. They say that PepsiCo engaged in bad faith bargaining, retaliation, and failed to provide information to the union. John Coley Jr., Secretary Treasurer of that local, said PepsiCo's behavior is so egregious it's unimaginable. Heavy rhetoric from a union rep. I'm so surprised.
Very odd.
Yes. So some workers said that they've been with this company for more than 45 years. Obviously, this is a really tough scenario for anybody, regardless of, who says what to whom. Obviously, many of these workers being absent a paycheck right after the holidays, as the calendar will play out here in the next 60 days. It's a tough spot to be. So it'll be interesting to see if these lawsuits get anywhere, and if so, what these workers would get in the end.
It is a really tough spot. And Jeff, you do feel for any of the workers, but especially those with tenures 45 years long, to show up Monday, just find out that it's closing immediately and indefinitely, grab your stuff and go. I mean, I guess at least they got to grab their stuff. They didn't just lock them out and say, we'll ship it to them. I don't know. It's a bad situation. And I guess I wouldn't have predicted that PepsiCo had to go so far as to making these kind of cuts across the board. Yeah,
I think when you look at it just at the initial sort of surface of things, it wasn't surprising to see a bottler of primarily soda products reducing workforce. Like, that isn't a surprise.
Yeah.
It is a surprise when you see PepsiCo, which is the second largest, cutting this many from this many locations. I mean, 400 people from, is it 4 or 5 locations?
4. And those specific locations too, right? Yeah. Chicago, Cincinnati, Harrisburg. We're talking about or the Atlanta area as well. We're talking about major populations there.
So that's what surprised me, was the quantity, the number, the scope of it. But when you look at things within Pepsi in terms of they're selling less stuff, therefore the sales are way down, they're producing less, the prices are higher, so their revenue is actually not hurting as badly as you might think because prices are higher.
Yeah.
So there's that dynamic too, but there's also the fact that what Pepsi is probably looking at here is the fact that they have a lot of independent bottling operations that they also source a lot of work to. So if they're not wholly owned by Pepsi, PepsiCo Bottling Ventures out of North Carolina, I think, is their largest one. It has 17 locations. So when you look at those types of partners where they're working in conjunction with somebody else and they're not on the hook for all of the operational costs, you can see why they may be tempted to shift more work there and away from some of these independent operations, just because, again, selling less stuff. There's a less demand for it. We know consumer preferences have shifted away from sugary soda drinks. So on the surface, this makes sense, but there's a lot of stuff going on here that Anna mentioned, especially with the WARN Act violations. You would think there's a lot of grounds to that. This does seem sort of out of whack to give little or no notice, especially when you're this large of an entity with this type of tenured employee.
So I want to ask both of you the same question, but Anna, because I jumped into a lot of the Teamster stuff as well. Does this seem raise a couple of retaliatory red flags to you? In terms of being retaliation?
The Teamsters lawsuit?
No. The closure in Chicago.
Well, retaliation for what?
When they were negotiating the collective bargaining that went on 6 months ago.
Maybe. I think Jeff is right. There's a lot of market factors that would support this decision in, I don't know what that number is that makes sense, but we do know that Pepsi is reporting lower sales. We do know that the market for soda is shrinking. We do know that they have some redundancies with their bottling network that they use. I don't think it's completely out of line to say that this would happen either way, but again, I don't know.
No, it is. Some of that is hard to reconcile, right? Like hearing that America is drinking less soda. I mean, my first reaction is, oh, that's probably good. Jeff, so a couple of things that I pulled out from John Coley Jr., as you said, the Secretary Treasurer. One from the union statement, the union said that they were told this decision has been contemplated for months. Even the police were notified a week ago because they wanted to have a police presence on site in case anything happened. It's odd that they say we've been thinking about this for months. We even told the cops a week ago, but yet we couldn't give you any notice, and it was just show up and pack and go.
Yeah, there seems like there has to be some internal dynamics there that we're not privy to at this point for somebody to take that dramatic of precautions to keep it under wraps. That doesn't make sense. There does seem to be some sort of disconnect there. From a retaliatory perspective, I don't think so. We talk about this a lot with food and how tight the margins are and everything like that. And then you're looking at a company that's also going to be facing huge shareholder pressures as well. So these quick movements, while unpalatable, are not always a shock. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what sort of led to this whole situation kind of blowing up so fast.
Well, I'll grab one of John Coley Jr.'s quotes. This quote is the reason I was asking the question, right? He said to the press, quote, "To the press, they said the building was 60 years old and not repairing. In our meeting, they told us that the company is, quote, over capacity, whatever that means." Those are his words, not mine. I understand what over capacity means. When pressed why they didn't raise a potential closure in the negotiations that ended less than 6 months ago, Coley says management had no answer. So again, it's crazy that all of this happened so recently. And, all of a sudden it just came up. Coley also went on to say that Chicagoland is one of the biggest markets for Pepsi beverages, and not having a production facility just doesn't make sense. It's hard not to believe that this is retaliation.
So last week we talked about, Pepsi's apparent shock that consumers were fighting back against shrinkflation, even though there was a ton of data to support that trend in other industries. Maybe
they're doing the same with soda.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they were just like a little bit behind on figuring this out. I mean, that would stand to reason if what they said when they, turn things around on their shrinkflation strategy, if that kind of lines up with that, I guess. I don't know. That's my take.
Giant company, no one running the numbers.
Not looking at anything.
Yeah. Now one person at a spreadsheet that already has an equation that like gradually changes colors as it's, shifting. Just, hey, does anyone want to look at this? No? All right, we'll figure it out later.
Is red bad?
Yeah. The red's bad, right? Because it went from pink to red to dark red. Not yet? Okay. Next week, guys. Next week. All right. Our next most popular story. Boeing marked up Air Force soap dispensers by 8,000%. After receiving a tip on its hotline, the Pentagon's Office of the Inspector General looked into some potentially hair-raising invoices from Boeing. According to the Inspector General, Boeing overcharged the Air Force about $1 million, don't know why I said it like that, $1 million for spare parts on C-17 cargo planes. Perhaps the most egregious charge, or at least the one that got the most attention, was the 8,000% markup for bathroom soap dispensers. The DoD's auditors reviewed these costs for 46 spare parts on these cargo planes from 2018 to 2022. 12 of them were overpriced, 9 were reasonable, and 25 couldn't be determined. Boeing shot down the allegation with a pretty straightforward response, saying the report, quote, appears to be based on an inapt comparison of the prices paid for parts that meet aircraft and contract specifications and designs versus basic commercial items that would not be qualified or approved for use on the C-17. Anna, I think Boeing actually makes a pretty strong case here that the soap dispenser on the C-17 Globemaster is going to be a little more expensive than the one that you put in your bathroom.
So you think that the inspector general is somehow too incompetent to do an apples to apples, and he was like, here's a soap dispenser from Target and it's less?
Yeah, well, no, Home Depot. But I mean, so I did put the link only because it looked a little odd. I mean, I understand that there's a lot of these parts, there were no apple to apples comparisons. So if you grab the link of the picture of the soap dispenser, it does seem like, okay, one is clearly for a commercial aircraft and another is just, for soap dispensing. So I don't know. And another thing is that there are very clear certifications, whether or not, and we can get into it as to whether or not they're necessary on all these components, that these parts have to pass. And as a result, there's a premium, and apparently an 8,000% premium on it.
Yeah. To me, that doesn't pass the sniff test. I think Boeing came up with a quick defense there, but it's not like this is the first time they or anyone has been accused of overinflating their pricing, especially when it comes to DoD contracts. I uncovered a study by CBS News that was published last year where they pointed to expert claims that military contractors overcharge the Pentagon on almost everything the Defense Department buys every year. With half of the U.S. defense budget of $800 billion that goes to defense contractors, that amounts to a lot of waste. They interviewed a gentleman named Shay Assad, who is the former contract negotiator for the DoD. He says that the accountability system is broken in the Department of Defense, and it stems from an effort in the 90s to save money by getting suppliers to consolidate. He says the impact was 51 companies merging into 5, which limited competition and severely reduced the government's leverage in the negotiations. Adding to that were some additional cuts in the 2000s where jobs overseeing contracts were eliminated and companies were asked to mostly self-police. I don't think you need me to connect those dots there, but to Assad's point, it was something like 13,000 jobs were cut in the contract, oversight department. So it's easy to see how some things are being overlooked when those deals are being made, and then maybe come to find out at the end of the day, you're dealing with an 8,000% increase. So you have these results. There's a reason for them. Mm-hmm. And this is far from the first time a company like Boeing has been caught with their hand in the cookie jar. This has happened to them many times.
So many cookie jars lately.
Yeah. I mean, but pertaining to military contracts.
Yeah.
And they're not the only one, right? So I think there's a lot of systematic problems with the contracting process. And of course, now if you have a lot less oversight on that, then this stuff is going to continue to happen.
So I want to make sure I get this right. There were previously 13,000 more individuals looking at these contracts, and now there are 13,000 less people looking at these contracts.
That is what the CBS News report said, and I can pull the exact
and then there's shock that stuff like this
quote. They said 13,000 jobs were cut pertaining to these contract.
Okay. Well, it's also, doesn't it say something, Jeff, that, I mean, as long as I can remember, the markup on government contracts has been a running joke. Like even before my professional career, there were jokes in movies and TV about, you don't think they really pay $800 for a hammer, stuff like that, So this has been a long-standing sort of gouging, potentially. And we could talk about a potential entirely new market here in terms of AS 9100, ISO 9001, and ITAR certified products available at your local Home Depot. So you could use the same thing that's on the C-17 for, what is an 8,000% markup on a
$149,000
for a soap dispenser?
I mean, you're the math guy. I don't want to step on your toes.
Whoa. I can't go moving commas that quick, Jeff.
Okay,
clearly you got it already.
No, I looked at an article online. So, and I guarantee you that $30 soap dispenser, just based on, and maybe things have changed, okay, I'll give you that, but based on my time in the military, that soap dispenser probably was costing more like around $8.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
doubt very much it was the $30 model.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think this brings to light a couple of different things. I think, first of all, there's sort of been an understanding when you're working with the military or the Department of Defense, they're a difficult customer.
Yeah.
They're slow to figure things out. They're slow to get contracts returned. They're slow to make changes. They're slow to pay. And in sort of providing recompense for that, there are upcharges, there are overages on these things. And I think that's sort of been an acceptable business practice between both parties.
Yeah.
It's okay that it's no longer being acceptable. That's a good thing. One of the things this brings to light, too, is we always wonder about Boeing and how it continues to get a lot of these contracts. One of the points that was made out in a lot of different reports online is that there's not enough competition right now. Yeah. So basically, once you make these deals with a Boeing or a Lockheed or a Raytheon or whomever it is, who else are you going to go to?
Yeah, they got
Once
you.
things are in place, again, because of the systematic dynamic of these contracts as well, once you're locked in, you're sort of, for lack of a better word, at their mercy. Mm-hmm. Now, in this one instance, the egregious level that this was marked up is... I mean, you got to be smarter than this, right?
Yeah,
there's
just
rounding,
800%.
There's rounding things up, and then there's this. I mean, this is ridiculous. And I think the thing that frustrates me a little bit is, so the Department of Defense, the Inspector General comes out with this report. Then what? Mm-hmm. I mean, you're looking at the report itself. This is the last paragraph. The DoD OIG, which is the Office of the Inspector General, made 8 recommendations, including that the commander of the Air Force the Lifecycle Management Center direct the C-17 contracting offer to review spare part prices, determine whether price increases of 25% or above occurred, and obtain justification of the prices. The DoD OIG will continue to monitor progress towards implementation of these recommendations.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, you did this wrong.
Yeah. Don't do it again.
No, there's nothing after it. It's just like if you tell your kids, like, hey, I know what you did.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, then what?
The DoD, I guess I was hoping that maybe it was a little bit more understood, because the DoD said the Air Force didn't validate the accuracy of the data used in contract negotiation, didn't conduct contract surveillance to identify price increases during contract execution, and didn't review invoices to determine fair and reasonable prices before payment. So I think that it goes to say that if they didn't do that, their advice is do that now.
Okay, that's fine. But it's kind of like saying to, bringing in somebody who investigates a bank robbery and says, the bank could have been more secure, and stop there. Go after the thief.
Yeah.
I mean, there has to be some recompense. There has to be something that holds Boeing accountable here as well to sort of set the stage or set a standard for other defense contractors. That's my point here. If you're okay with this, as the Department of Defense, don't do the report. Don't waste time looking into this stuff, because this is just how it works.
Just let it happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or do something to make sure it doesn't happen again. That was what I found the most frustrating part of this.
Yeah.
So I found that line in the article, and I got it wrong, and it's worse than I even said. It said in the early 2000s, the Pentagon, in another cost-saving move, cut 130,000 employees whose jobs were to negotiate and oversee defense contracts. That is
130,000.
So if no one is monitoring these and no one is looking at justifications, and this is exactly why there's no one there to do it.
Yeah, that's. There's trimming the fat, and then there's dismantling the department responsible for it.
Right, like trimming the fat so fat can be built immediately back in elsewhere on the backs of these, contractors. That's exactly what's happening.
So Boeing tried to make the case, Jeff, that, maybe we could pull back on some of these requisite certifications, especially on non-mission critical parts. I mean, maybe we don't need ITAR certification or ITAR certified soap dispensers.
That's such a slippery slope, though, because where do you stop and start? And how do you
start with
that
soap?
Out? Well, okay. But where does that go then? Because then that can lead into giving preferential treatment to somebody else. Okay. Yeah. And I know a guy who works at, my brother-in-law's place down the way. Let's just give it to him.
Yeah.
Because it's just a soap dispenser. Well, okay. But that is preferential treatment. That's not the way this is supposed to work. And then from there, it potentially goes into other things that we don't think are a big deal. Hydraulics on a door. Okay. Guess what? That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. And we've learned that. So I think once you go that route where Boeing is trying to defend themselves, you can't. You need all of these checks and balances in place, unfortunately. because that's how we protect ourselves from choosing the wrong people, going with always the low cost or going with the lowest quality.
You got to make sure the checks and balances are in place, but you need to make sure you have the checkers and the balancers. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like quite a purge.
That does feel like something that could be automated very quickly.
Yeah,
as well. So.
Okay. The Inspector General, Robert Storch, I also pulled out a couple of things because they did give some actionable insight. He said the Air Force needs to establish and implement more effective internal controls to help prevent overpaying for spare parts for the remainder of this contract. And this contract actually goes for another 7 years through 2031. Storch also said significant overpayments for spare parts may reduce the number of spare parts that Boeing can purchase on the contract, which could reduce C-17 readiness worldwide. So it has ramifications on both sides. But yeah, let's see next week what cookie jar Boeing's going to be in. I was surprised. Were you guys surprised at all that there was no comparison for more than half, like 26 or 25 of the parts? Did that surprise you at all? That there was just, that was the only option?
No, I mean, it kind of goes back to the lack of competition dynamic. We're looking at pretty specialized stuff for a very high-tech aircraft. So, no, I guess not really.
There's 25 new products that Palantir can start manufacturing this week.
It does seem like something, though, that they can require of the supplier to provide a justification, like line item of those components and try to figure out if that's fair or not.
That's true.
I mean, people are capable of that, right?
Yeah. People are capable of that. But the news is made by the people that shockingly didn't. No. All right. Our next most popular story, 1.3 million chickens killed after poultry processor goes belly up. As of October 25th, about 2 weeks ago, the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship had killed some 1.3 million broiler chickens after receiving the go-ahead from the court. Pure Prairie Poultry filed for bankruptcy at the end of September. They blamed pandemic-influenced supply chain issues and low chicken prices. The company had between $100 million and $500 million in outstanding debts. Pure Prairie told the Iowa agency that it couldn't buy feed for the chickens at 13 contracted farms in Iowa. Days later, the company closed up shop, laid off its staff, all in Charles City, Iowa. As a result, the contracted farmers were left holding the bag and didn't have the money to care for the chickens or any place to process them. According to the Star Tribune, 300,000 birds in Minnesota and another 170,000 birds in Wisconsin were also stranded. However, only 139,000 of the Minnesota chickens had to be culled, and the Wisconsin chickens were all rehomed. The Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship tried to move the chickens. They tried to find other markets, processors, and even had a tentative agreement in place to sell the 1.3 million birds, but the buyer backed out over potential legal costs or potential litigation from lien claims from third parties. Jeff, how in this scenario is the best option to cull the entire flock? I mean, and there has to be some sort of extenuating circumstances that would have protected these potential buyers from these lien claims, just so you don't have to destroy 1.3 million birds.
You would think.
Yeah.
And you don't know who exactly all the debtors were and what they were actually looking to recoup here, if they were feed people, if they were equipment people. I don't know. It just seems like such a horrific waste.
Yeah.
When you look at, there's roughly 140,000 farms between Minnesota and Iowa. Pretty sure if you offered them each like 10 chickens, they would have taken them.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have had to do this. I mean, these were young chickens too. These are broilers. For those who are not familiar, this is probably a chicken that's like less than 2 months old.
Yeah.
So they're not even old enough to lay eggs yet, which if you let them get that old, there's more profit center there potentially for all of these birds. So it seems like a horrible waste. It feels like what got in the way is basically all these debtors not signing off on the fact that if any revenue or any profit came from any of these birds, which at the end of the day, we're looking at probably like $2 a bird on average.
Yeah.
In profit after you feed them and everything else, They just were not going to let that go. They were not going to sign off. So there was no other option. You couldn't even give the birds away, because if the farmers or anybody else made any money off of it, that was going to have to come back to these debtors. So it's a sad situation when we can't get sign off on these things. Mm-hmm. And this is the only thing we can do with a resource that's been made available to us that could help so many people out.
Yeah, just straight up. Okay, listen. Yeah, they owe you money. They have none. They have chickens. You can take 20,000 chickens as payback, or, we'll settle the debt in some other way in court later. I don't know. Anna, it just seems that, especially, so when you get a little bit more context, farmers without feed were facing costs of $20,000 a week or more to take care of this bankrupt company's poultry. That is a huge expense. Mm-hmm. So I understand that there, something had to be done. Otherwise, we're talking about 13 other contracted farms potentially becoming insolvent. But man, there just had to be a better way, especially when there are so many parts of this country that have food security issues.
I know. It was disappointing overall, I think. One important point here that stood out to me, though, was that the USDA, I think they really did their best here. They were very involved from honestly, like a few years back with this company. They tried to prop up this company with some funding a few years back. They had given them a $7 million grant designed as a stopgap, and then a loan that became accessible to them in April of 2023. So not very long ago. And unfortunately, this company was not able to make it work still. But outside of that, when this issue came up with the farmers being stranded with the chickens, no feed, the USDA ultimately took on the problem by taking ownership of these assets and relieving the farmers from the obligation of feeding and finding a place for them. So it's good that they were there. But mostly I want to talk about Pure Prairie, the company that went belly up, as you said.
Yeah,
here.
Well, and it was no small loan. Like, they got a $7 million grant as sort of a bridge to what was going to be essentially a $40 million loan.
Yeah, it was $38 million loan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was 1 year ago.
Yeah.
So, I think there's some questions as to what happened there. The company's defense for this, as you said, was that the financial problem stemmed from the COVID-19 pandemic and low chicken prices. And that I found a bit perplexing, considering the price of chicken has increased. It increased 5% in 2020, 5.25% in 2021, and nearly 15% in 2022.
Yeah, where is this suppressed chicken market? I have not seen it.
Yeah, that was the largest price increase in history. Inflation for chicken has been higher than the rate of overall inflation over the last couple years. So to me, that sounds like an excuse. I'm not sure why they put that out there as being the reason.
Well, you bring it up all the time, right? Is the COVID-19 scapegoat, right?
It's a scapegoat.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, you gave us millions, but COVID, you know what I mean?
I know. So there's a few lawmakers that are asking the USDA for answers on their accountability requirements for giving that money out. In fact, there's some lawmakers that are asking them for some detail on their oversight of that. Mm-hmm. But not only that, also adding that PPP, the company, should answer for what they did with that money. And I think, in my opinion, that's a more interesting question, because I don't find the company's defense to be particularly compelling. Yeah. So I kind of want to know really what happened. Like, what happened in the last 2 years that this is the state of your business?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things. Is that, like, Pure Poultry, or Pure Prairie Poultry, which rolls off the tongue.
PPP.
Yeah, PPP. There's going to be no recompense for any of these contracted farmers, anyone else that is kind of shouldering the burden. And birds are dead, man.
Well, I think, to try to dive into the issues that this company had, when you have 1.3 million birds and you don't even know how to feed them. Yeah, that's kind of like a basic principle of your business.
Yep.
I think that shows that there was a lot of forecasting, supply chain issue type of dynamics within that company that they were struggling with mightily. So while it may not be a good reason as far as using COVID as the excuse, maybe they just they never had the skill set available to them to adjust to new demand and pricing. Not a good reason.
Yeah.
But I think that, obviously they were bad at what they were doing or they wouldn't be bankrupt and out of business.
No, it's true. How many times do we wind up talking about companies that just comes down to a lack of business savvy? Yeah. It might not have been an ethical issue at all, even though, maybe $50 million evaporated and went somewhere. But that's the other thing is that really up until it comes to processing, like all they have to do is crunch the numbers. We have this many birds. They need to be fed this much feed until we turn them into meat. It's not, we're not working with a lot of numbers here.
Well, some of those numbers have come down. Chicken feed was skyrocketing for a couple of years. That's come down as well.
Yeah. So. On the bright side, it's not very bright. On the dim side, less dim, in Wisconsin, those birds were salvaged and they were able to provide 1 million pounds of meat that went to small town families instead of the trash. So small.
That's good.
Small bright side.
Yeah. That's not the dim side.
Well, in the grand scheme of things, like this small, you just see how when they were able to salvage a small sliver of these birds, the impact that they were able to make. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why just comparatively is very frustrating. Very frustrating. Donating them to Iowa residents facing food insecurity. That also faced problems with the lien holders. And also there were claim risks, logistics, timeliness, scale requirements. I get that you can't just hand off 1.3 million birds, but
so the lien holders were like, no, don't give them away to poor people.
Yeah. But think how often we see that in the food supply chain.
Oh yeah.
Where the food goes bad and has to be destroyed because there's liability, because of blockchain issues. That was one thing that you get so frustrated with, especially when you volunteer in a soup kitchen and you just see what they're working with versus what could potentially be available. Because I've also, worked in a grocery store and you see what gets thrown away.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, think anyone else could use this? And they're just like, well, we can't, liability. Very frustrating. All right. Oh, the other thing that I thought was at least showed that they were trying is that in this process, they started killing the largest and least marketable birds as they tried to shop the dwindling flock. Mm-hmm. Just like, okay, well, we're going to start on that end and hopefully at any point of this process, we find someone to take them. And this slowly none, no takers. It's bad. All right. Well, our next most popular story, butcher harvests invasive raccoons to make meatballs. Germany has a raccoon problem. The mammals were brought to the country in the 1920s, used on fur farms, and released into the wild in 1934. Now, the country's overrun by some 2 million raccoons. They're invasive, destroying other habitats, species, and ecosystems. When local officials ran through their options, they came to one conclusion: raccoon murder. However,
it was said that way too.
No, it was said, we must choose raccoon murder. That's how it went down. I was there. I saw the notes. Well, one hunter suggested, Michael Rice, who's a local butcher, an avid hunter, he suggested a more sustainable option than just throwing them away. And now at Wilder Hoyt, Rice's butcher shop, you can buy raccoon meatballs, jarred raccoon meat, raccoon salami, raccoon bratwurst, and raccoon liver sausage, among other products available. Some customers were worried about contamination, but all meat must pass a trichinella test. The parasitic roundworms are sometimes found in undercooked pork and other meat, but the meat poses its own unique taste that is hard to describe, but has been described as, quote, delicious.
Sounds like it's easy to describe.
Well, it's just like, when someone asks, how does it taste? It's hard to describe. You know what? Delicious. It's delicious. It's great. While other game is often combined with pork fat because it's too lean, raccoon meat doesn't require such enhancements and thus includes very few ingredients. For example, according to the company, these raccoon meatballs have a little more than salt, pepper, and egg in them. Some of the products, like their salami and their knacker, added deer to the mix as well. So a little taste of venison with your Raccoon Knacker. Rice came up with the idea while preparing for the Green Week International Food Fair in Berlin. And Anna, few would have predicted it, but he came up with the winner. This has been a wild story in terms of what was maybe a novelty. Has I don't know if it's necessarily brought Mr. Rice fame and fortune, but he will forever be known as the raccoon meat guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if raccoon is so delicious because of raccoon's steady diet of trash. Do you think that's part of it?
I think, no, it's what do they call it? Like
it's a scavenger.
A diverse food pellet. Native. It's a native, diverse food pellet. But I mean, come on. If Germany can figure out how to solve its 2 million raccoon problem, what's 1.3 million chickens?
That's true. And unlike that last story, this feels like a actual practical solution. I think we've gotten so far away from the idea of scarcity that these types of solutions feel novel, but I guess why should they? From my perspective, and I think many agree, it's far more humane to hunt wild game who live a free and normal life versus something that's born to just live in a crate and be slaughtered.
Yeah. Farmed.
Yeah. It's more humane. It's better for the environment. It clearly solves a problem here. The only thing that requires some handling, and it's being covered here, obviously, is that the butcher understands any potential risks and is testing for that. And I think the concern in the U.S. is potentially that there would be a bit more regulation around this if this were to be our circumstances. So specifically, federal law states that wild game species that can be legally hunted under federal or state regulatory authority cannot be sold, but they can be harvested for personal consumption. And in Wisconsin, fun fact, where we live, you can do that on your own land without a hunting license.
Very good.
So anytime in your backyard, you can take out a raccoon and you can eat it for dinner. No questions asked. No,
that's what Jonathan Williams said on the site. He said Granny would be proud, serve it with possum bellies and grits, and you're good to go.
Yeah. I mean, it's great that somebody's doing this. I think I don't know if, I don't know if this is a newer phenomenon that people, butcher shops are becoming a little bit more like unique and updated, and people are getting a little bit more adventurous. And I think that if there's a market for this, why not?
No, I think it's one thing I like about the hunter mentality, having a hunter in charge of, these sort of not problems, but finding solutions like this where you want to not just harvest an animal, but use every part of it. And I do agree. I thought that this was an incredible solution to a problem. It is, a lot of people on the website were saying we will likely see something like this in the US because there are regulations that allow you to do it anyways. But, we do have some similar invasive, or not invasive raccoon, but we have some incredible raccoon populations out there in certain pockets of America. And who knows, maybe raccoon salami is the way to go.
Well, you'd have to get that federal law changed about selling it. That's the thing. So someone will have to take up this issue about selling raccoons legally.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we have just the Congress to do it.
Yep. So we're going to get it done.
Someone's going to get it done.
That's right. Jeff, as I was looking into the story, one thing I was hoping for was a few more numbers on the exotic meat market. But would you believe it? Not a lot of information out there, which makes me believe that A, it's not that big or lucrative, and B, it's not that, I don't know, it's a little more secretive?
Well, this approach, hunting invasive species, turning them into a food, is not new. I mean, we do this in the U.S. If you look up in Alaska, they've got an issue with green crabs. Down in Florida, the lionfish, that they're harvesting those, putting them in tacos.
Yeah.
Around here, down in southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, it's the big carp issue.
Yeah.
With all that. So this whole movement, which I didn't realize it had a name for it, is called invasivorism.
What?
Invasivorism.
Oh, that's all like carnivorism? It's invasivorism?
Invasivorism is hunting these invasive species and eating them.
Okay.
So there is if we want to go after raccoons, there is a pathway to do it. We've done it with carp and crab and fish and lots of other stuff. So as humans have sort of wrecked the environment, we're trying to fix it and coming up with innovative ways to try to make good on introducing all these invasive species. So it's a novel approach. I'll give them that. I have heard of raccoon stew before.
Yeah.
But never like sausage or where it was the only ingredient in the product. So.
I was really trying. I had, and I joke about this in the coverage of it, but I had my cart full. I bought one of everything, and they let you get all the way down, billing, shipping info, down to the address, click your country, and then the only option is Germany. I'm like, oh, dirty pool.
You were going to have raccoon meat shipped over the ocean?
Yeah. I mean, most of it is, like all the sausage, it's all, cured and jarred products that have a long shelf life. So it would have been fine.
Okay.
Yes. Jeff, thank you for the new vocabulary word. I had no idea that invasive vorism was a word, and that just rolls off the tongue.
I mean, that could be an idea for a chain of butcher shops right there.
Invasivore?
Serving the invasivore.
Yeah, your local invasivore. According to Mark's Foods, when you buy this exotic meat, one thing that you should look for are companies that prioritize ethical practices, sustainability, and transparency. Don't want to be buying black market meat from just anybody.
Right.
Because talk about a gamble. You want to make sure that the meat is procured legally and complies with animal welfare and environmental standards. Some of this exotic meat is wild caught, but there is a number of sustainable farms for this exotic meat as well. I went through a couple of things that are available in the U.S. exotic meat market, and I know that Anna's not going to try any of these. But Jeff, maybe you're adventurous enough to try boneless turtle meat.
Okay, I've heard turtle is actually amazing.
Okay.
Because my dad even used to, they used to catch these huge snapping turtles when they were fishing, and they would keep them and, butcher them.
All right. Well,
I would definitely do the turtle.
Next time, we're going to catch a turtle and eat it.
Okay.
Ground camel.
Sure.
Alligator tail tenderloins.
I've had alligator.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I was not as big a fan. Maybe
Really?
it wasn't prepared well. But,
okay. I liked it. Burmese python meat.
Seems like it'd be super fatty.
Yeah?
I don't think I could do that one.
Yeah, really? You think snake would be fatty?
I don't know.
I think it's like all muscle.
Oh, maybe.
Really lean?
Maybe.
Beaver stew meat.
Yeah, I could do beaver.
Okay. Otter sausage.
I don't know.
Ooh.
Like you see those at the zoo. That might be kind of tough.
I mean,
Kind of adorable.
It is harder to eat the more adorable animals.
Yeah, I don't think I could do otter. That might be
Finally, just in time for the holidays, I say skip the ham. Let's do reindeer hamburgers this year for Christmas.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a venison burger, right?
I've got one for you. What about iguana?
Iguana. Oh,
They're
no, I'd try
harvesting
that.
those down in Florida.
Yeah, no, I'd try that. Man, I mean, if you could just have a fire outside in Florida and just start picking the geckos off the side and throw them on a little stick,
Yeah?
Gecko on a stick. I don't know.
Wow.
I mean, if we're getting weird, let's get weird. I mean, if you eat a frog leg, what's another amphibian or lizard leg,
Fair enough.
But in terms of this, I didn't know again of invasive vorism. But when I did work
That's your new favorite word. You said that a lot lately.
I'm just trying to get it to come out of my mouth correctly. Invasive vorism. Getting better. But when I did work at that soup kitchen, one thing that was cool was that whenever the DNR killed off geese or ducks, they would bring them into the soup kitchen and have them prepared. The only thing is that sometimes they're like riddled with shot, so you had to, eat around it. But but that was another thing that like couldn't legally be served, so it just kind of had to be quietly served. All right. Well, so now that I found a site that will deliver to the U.S., let's get weird. I say we get Bill back in here, resident Today in Manufacturing podcast grill master, and just throw some weird stuff at him. I didn't even get into the list of hot dogs. There's some weird hot dogs out there.
I will be out that day, whatever day it is.
I mean, even curious, like, just what's that? Just like throwing a slab of Burmese python on the grill?
Yeah. So after being a vegetarian for 25 odd years, I'm going to start back in the game with Burmese python. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Maybe that was the one to trip your trigger. Just like, you know what? I've never had snake, and my God, what have I been missing?
It's time.
All right. Our most popular story this week. Rare cars found in secret junkyard sold for millions. In 1967, Rudy Klein started an LA scrapyard business called Porsche Foreign Auto. Many knew it as the Junkyard. Klein intentionally misspelled Porsche without an S because the car maker maybe made some threats to sue him. For decades, Klein kept his collection secret, closed to the public. Very few people were ever allowed to enter. Well, Klein passed away in 2001, and a recent auction revealed what he had hiding behind those garage doors. RM Sotheby's recently auctioned off some famous cars from the collection, including 3 rare Lamborghini Miuras that had been untouched for 46 years. And boy, the people were excited. The 1967 Miura P400 was the 53rd Miura ever made, sold for $610,000, and it doesn't even have an engine. The 1968 Lamborghini Miura P400 sold for $1.325 million and was likely originally owned by Claudio Zampoli, a factory test engineer and driver. The 1969 Lamborghini Miura P400S sold for $967,500. First delivered in 1969, the vehicle suffered a front-end collision and had been off the road since 1978. The auction also had vehicles, engines, car parts from various automakers like Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, Ferrari, and Lamborghini. Anna, it's cool when these cars are, quote, discovered or rediscovered, but it's also kind of unfortunate that they've been hidden away for so long.
Yeah, sort of. I had mixed feelings reading this story. It was, I don't know. When you look at some of the vehicles that were there, like the Miura, for example, like that vehicle is iconic, right? I mean, it was the fastest production car in the world when it came out. It had a top speed of 280 kilometers per hour, an acceleration of 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 6.7 seconds. This is the 1960s. Yeah. They said it set new standards in the sports car segment. It had a V12. It was a 2-seater. It was just like this very cool looking, 1960s sports car.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like with that in mind and how interesting, historic, and undeniably fun and like beautiful many of these old vehicles are, I actually found this story to be a little bit sad that they were just housed in this. I mean, because if you look at photos of the junkyard, you will know how it got its name because it looks like this clapboard, like...
Yeah, it's a junkyard.
It looks like a junkyard.
Yeah, it's not like some boutique, well-lit museum with all these cars that is kind of ironically called the junkyard. No, this is a junkyard.
This is
full of scrap metal that
yes,
happened to be worth a lot of money.
A for real junkyard. So it looks like maybe it was a hoarding situation, or maybe he didn't know the value of these. It's potential that he just, because a lot of them were pretty dinged up or missing parts or in collisions or whatever. But, these rare and valuable vehicles that were irreplaceable in, any sense here were just sitting here collecting dust for so long. That said, alternatively, you could say as much about a vehicle of this stripe, like sitting in a clean garage in some millionaire's home, being buffed every day with a towel, but just sitting there, like that happens too. It lives where it lives, I guess. But
you could just say Jay Leno.
Jay Leno's garage. But, you'd love to see someone care for these vehicles, considering the legacy of them. But at the end of the day, they're just metal. So.
But I think that's where they're headed to next. And I mean, to say a little dinged up,
right,
is the most gracious way these will ever be described.
Right, I know.
Jeff, some of these cars were in rough shape. It's a huge commitment, but will likely be fully restored just because of the rarity of them. Now, do you think, what do you think about sort of sequestering these vehicles for 40 to 50 years? Because, you could make the argument that if they weren't put away, even though some of them are for more or less a bucket of bolts, maybe they're not around anymore if they're still in circulation.
So I had a very different perspective on this story than you guys did, because I think this guy was kind of genius.
Yeah.
What Rudy Klein did here, he was an immigrant. He was a butcher. There's a great article actually that kind of dives into this on Car and Driver. It's about 12 years old.
Okay.
So it's a little bit closer to, unfortunately, when he passed. But anybody who's ever done any work in automotive salvaging or restoration knows you can parts a car out for probably 4 or 5 times what it's actually worth.
Okay.
And I think that's what he was doing here.
Yeah.
And what's the best way to hide hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in car parts?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Don't make it look like a showcase. Make it look like a junkyard where there's nothing there. He was extremely protective of who he allowed in there, who he worked with, but he became the go-to guy in Southern California if you needed a rare part for some of these imported sports cars.
Yeah.
So he was known in these circles. So I think everything he did was very deliberate in terms of the way that these were not maintained, not kept up. Now, I do think there was a hoarding mentality a little bit here as well, but I think there was a little bit more method to his madness than maybe you give him credit for if you just look at it bare bones the way it was. When he died, he did leave this to his kids, and I was kind of curious as to why they suddenly sort of adjusted their perspective on all of these cars and all the parts as well. But maybe it just became time when they realized we're sitting on $30 million in inventory here.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Well, did they know? Were they in this inner circle? Okay, they knew.
The vibe that I can't completely, I didn't talk to them.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think they all knew exactly what they had here.
Okay.
I don't think these were barn finds. I don't think this was, look what we discovered. They knew this stuff was here. And I think the market either dried up for some of these older sports car parts.
Okay.
And then it became time for them to move on. But no, I think especially Rudy, maybe not his sons as much, but I think Rudy Klein knew exactly what he had here. Most people would have moved more quickly and more aggressively. That was not his style.
Well, but I think that everyone has something they collect, right? And everyone likes to think that that collection is valuable. And this, I think, is their dream, right? Where he was a collector, maybe a little bit of a hoarder. And then this idea that at one point, his entire collection is going to be unveiled to the public and his genius revealed and netting $30 million for his family. I don't know. It's the collector's dream.
I don't think he had any of those illusions of grandeur, but I get a kick out of watching American Pickers and some of these other shows where they go in and they try to salvage some of these old and unique artifacts, what they call them.
Yeah.
And you always see those guys on there who's like, they'll offer him $20 for something. He's like, can't let it go for less than 25.
Yeah.
They always think it's worth more than maybe what it is. And I think he was one of those individuals who maybe he got offers for a lot of these parts or these cars. And he's like, no, it's worth more than that.
Yeah.
Held on to it to eventually his kids were able to cash out.
Were you surprised by the state some of these cars were in? Because, they were in rough shape.
Well, again, I think they were salvaged.
Yeah.
They were in accidents. He didn't do anything to improve them.
Yeah.
So, no.
No, okay. It's just a really rare car that he pulled parts off of rather than just a Civic. Okay, I get that. I would highly encourage anyone to go and check it out. Anna, did you have a chance to kind of page through some of the things there? It reminds me of when I go to a farm auction, right? And there are people bidding on a bunch of parts that are on a pallet. And I'm like, how is that worth anything? Is he going to scrap them? But, sometimes you got to be a little bit more of an expert to understand what you're looking at.
Yeah.
You're flipping through and it's like rusty engine. You have to get to the back of the catalog. A couple of things that stood out to me. There was the only bike that was in the entire lot was a 1956 Indian Fire Arrow 250 that was sold for $5,100. Yeah. And my family likes Indian motorcycles, so that one jumped out. It was a rarely seen post-war Indian built by Royal Enfield in the UK for the American market. There was also a 1969 Ferrari 365 GT by, is it Pininfarina? Mm-hmm. Sold for only $16,800. So, in some of them, this Ferrari in particular, and I'm going to use the term bucket of bolts again, because I sometimes like on the auction houses where, this is a pile of metal sitting on a pallet, and it's an intriguing basis for an ambitious restoration or excellent garage art.
Wow, that's some expensive garage art.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's wild what, and also we're talking about brands that have very impassioned followings, and some really rare finds there. So, but look at this thing right here, Jeff.
No, I saw the pictures. Yeah, it's all pretty rough, but the fact that it's still got that character of the initial build is what's going to draw everybody to it.
And it has the plate. You got to just, as long as you have the documentation there. And I think it's kind of cool when they have the story too, as to how he received it and what was the cause. I don't know. I think it's pretty cool on the storytelling. You looking at some of those?
Yeah, I just, I feel like if he had this whole thing figured out and he was he maybe would have not let all this stuff sit and get like as rusted out as it did. Cause I feel like if this is your retirement plan or your legacy that
you got a tarp on it.
Yeah. Like it's worth a lot less, due to the lack of upkeep, but what do I know? But yeah, it was very dusty in there.
Yes. A lot of, sharp edges, sharp, rusty edges. Be careful there. All right. Before we jump into, in case you missed it, we have another word from our new sponsor, Velocio. This week's episode is brought to you by Velocio. The digital transformation landscape is constantly changing, whether caused by unprecedented events or emerging technologies. This new guide will teach you how to manage these disruptions by building agile and resilient strategies. So, download, quote, a business leader's guide to digital transformation now to receive the ultimate resource for leaders to spring ahead of competitors. Jeff, once again, this is a new one, but a lot of times these aren't available for a very long time. So it's important that, you download it now when you have a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working with a company that seems to really have its pulse on some of the critical issues with manufacturing. They've got some other white papers out there dealing with software implementation struggles and strategies. So there's the source of the subject matter expertise is definitely one you can lean on for some great guidance.
Are they, have they been part of the Security Breach podcast too? Velocio? No. Okay. I was curious. The name is familiar. It's just like, I know those guys.
Yeah.
Got to figure it out. All right. In case you missed it, the stories that maybe not as popular on our websites, manufacturing.net and Industrial Equipment News, among others, but still could make a big impact on the industry going forward. I'll go first this week. My story was House Speaker says GOP may try to repeal CHIPS Act. So, last Friday, House Speaker Mike Johnson had a bit of a slip of the tongue. He said Republicans, quote, probably will try to repeal the bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act. According to the AP, Johnson said, quote, I expect that we probably will, but we haven't developed that part of the agenda yet. The act has jump-started domestic production of semiconductor chips and admittedly done so with a hefty investment, about $54 billion. The White House has credited the CHIPS Act for spurring hundreds of billions of dollars of investment, as well as hundreds of thousands of jobs. Johnson voted against the CHIPS Act, but later said it isn't on the agenda for repeal, but rather could be further streamlined and improved to eliminate costly regulations and requirements. They got to trim that bureaucratic fat. A large new Micron semiconductor manufacturing plant received grants of $6.1 billion from the CHIPS Act to make advanced memory computer chips near Syracuse, New York, and in Boise, Idaho. According to the Commerce Department, as of August, the CHIPS and Science Act has provided $30 billion in support of 23 projects in 15 states that will add 115,000 manufacturing and construction jobs. That funding helped drum up private capital and would enable the U.S. to produce 30% of the world's most advanced computer chips. Do you know what percentage of the computer chips we produced before that, Anna? It's 0. So, making a big leap forward. I chose this story just because I know that you can find a bipartisan angle on, or a partisan angle on any story or any initiative. I think that the CHIPS Act is something that has done a lot of good, on pace to do a lot of good in the U.S. and have a real positive impact on the supply chain. And I just hope that we're not already too far away from the chip shortage that kind of sent everything screaming to a halt supply chain wise to think, yeah, maybe we're fine without it. I'm hoping that we can maybe think of the benefits that this stands to deliver and continue this project just because, I don't know, this is something that I would hate to see go away and has already done a lot of good. Anna, did you have a chance to check out this story?
Yeah. And, I would say, hopefully I'm not being naive here in saying this, but I do think on the campaign trail, I don't care what party your candidate is with.
Yeah.
People say a lot of stuff. They make a lot of pledges about what they're going to repeal and dismantle and undo and from the previous administration. And I think once you get in there, it's a lot harder to do that once these programs are already out and rolling. A lot of this money has already been given out. There's projects underway. I don't think anyone wants to be tied to killing jobs or going in and taking money back from Intel or, Micron. I mean, I just like that is a very sticky situation once you get into it.
Yeah.
So, I guess I'll be surprised if I see this happen. But
yeah. Jeff, I know that we've said it many times on this podcast where sometimes we get a little hesitant, a little skeptical when we go picking winners. But I mean, I think this was a clear vulnerability in the U.S. supply chain. And we came up with, in my mind, a pretty straightforward solution to it.
Well, we don't know if it's a solution yet, but it was a good
idea. Sorry, we got a good idea.
No, I agree. I think there's no better way to guarantee the other $24 billion gets spoken for in the next 2 months than by saying you're going to kill something from the former administration. So don't be shocked if we see some double-digit billion-dollar deals coming out here in the next couple months to sort of secure up the rest of this funding.
Just outside the stadium trying to move those tickets. Like, I got $24 billion left. $24 billion left. Who needs to build a factory?
And I got 1.3 million chickens.
Yeah, right? You're not in the semiconductor game? How about chickens? You want to do chickens? You got any Burmese python meat?
Oh, God.
Anna, what's your in case you missed it this week?
I already earmarked this one for in case you missed it because I knew it was going to be missed. But the title, "This Wallet Would Never Fit in Your Pocket," I think is a line that underscores the challenge in distilling this topic into a headline, which is maybe why it got missed. I don't know. It was hard to relay what is happening here. But anyway, the story is based on this. So a recent survey explored Americans' comfort level with the prospect of using their vehicle as a digital wallet. And surprisingly, a small majority like this idea. So Vera Mobility asked drivers of vehicles that are model year 2019 or newer their thoughts on using their car to pay for things like parking, tolls, drive-throughs, and they found actually a widely receptive audience. Of the 2,000 people they surveyed, 54% said that they'd enable such a feature if it were available.
Yeah.
Along with this transition comes another perhaps more desirable one for automakers, much to my chagrin. But they said in the report that as more features tailored to driver experience become available, the idea of vehicle subscription services is kind of slowly becoming normalized. The survey said 40% of respondents had either paid for or renewed subscription services directly through their vehicle's infotainment systems. Autoblog says these findings could pave the way for automakers to offer more advanced fee-based features in the future. So two things. Interesting to me that consumers are this willing to align their financial information into their vehicles, especially with cybersecurity concerns. I would pause on that. I would hesitate to do that.
Yeah.
And then secondly, and I'm sure you have something to say about this, Jeff. But secondly, the suggestion that using your vehicle infotainment to pay for subscriptions is getting a boost. That sucks.
Yeah. Well, I guess if it's tied to my credit account and that seems to be pretty well, not regulated, but secure, I would feel all right with it.
So I'm assuming that you're at Starbucks drive-through and then whatever, device is IoT thing. And then you must have to click OK on your infotainment screen. But how big is that space that information is I don't know. I don't understand the technology as much as probably Jeff does, but it is concerning to me to just add another link to that chain, which is already that's a big requirement in terms of security.
But do you need to, so when you pay with your phone and you just put your phone up there, you have to hit confirm on your phone, right?
I don't pay with my phone.
Okay. Yeah, me neither. That's why I'm asking.
Okay.
So Jeff, do you see something like this and you just see another gateway, another vulnerability?
So many red flags.
Yeah.
So many and it's funny because
everybody's ready for it though.
Yeah. Well, they are. And I think the one thing that came to my mind initially was like tolls. If I didn't have to put that little toll thing up on the dashboard and we could figure something out there. Yeah, I could see how that works, but that's also one endpoint. And we've also talked about some of the telematics dynamics they're trying to put in place when we talked about that car and how it was taking pictures and everything. You can send it.
The vehicle to everything technology.
Right.
Yeah.
That's also very scary right now. Maybe down the road we can figure something out. But as you were talking, I was looking up an article we ran actually last week called Safeguarding Connected Cars from Cyber and Privacy Threats.
Oh.
And I just want to quote one sentence from that story. It said, every connected technological component in an automobile can serve as a data entry point for cyber criminals.
There you go.
So let's add one.
So
it's connected to your account.
I mean, what's the worst that could happen?
I mean, you just don't put your debit card on it.
What's funny is that people were like, they want more connected. They like the digital wallet thing, but they don't like having to pull out their phone all the time. Yeah. And when I read that, I was just like, okay, guys, like just like a very, very mild inconvenience for you to actually like pull out the money and hand it to the McDonald's person or whatever that you're doing. Like that is really not big of a deal. Like how is that worth it to anyone? To me, it seems a little bit crazy, but.
No, I'm with you there. All the security concerns, it just makes it so much easier for people to do bad things. Yeah, I don't get it.
The big sigh, like, here's my card.
Oh, where is my phone even?
So, I mean, one step from this, making your car your wallet, how many people do you think would be on board with just a chip? A chip in your index finger that tied to your personal information and just, you just pay with your finger.
I'm sure people would be into that. But I think
anytime there's a signal, David.
Yeah.
It can be interfered with.
No, I understand.
So
it's not for me.
There's too many that we want to do this. And this is a lot of the conversations that we have on Security Breach Podcast is it's great to have all these connections, but we always make the connection and then figure out how to make it secure.
Yeah.
And as long as we're not doing that in situations like this and we can make it work, great. Mm-hmm. That hasn't been our track record. We've been really, really bad at that, which is why I get very pessimistic when these types of technologies come up.
So is it a generational thing where do younger generations understand those vulnerabilities and they're just willing to roll with it? I don't know.
Not a clue, in my opinion. I think they're so used to the smartphone. Yeah. The smartphone has been so amazing in so many ways, but it's also given this comfort level that supersedes caution. Yeah. In terms of, and that's something, and I'm sure you will have it. I have had it with my kids. I know Eric has it with his. Talking to them repeatedly about being so careful about what you put out there in any way, shape, or form, because it'll be used in some way by bad people to get additional information and more information until they build something up where they can get that social security number, that credit card number, whatever it is. Yeah. And once they get that, there's no stopping.
Got the keys to the kingdom. And Anna, I gotta say, in your defense, is that this is a great story, but it came out Wednesday. Mm-hmm. I mean, Tuesday was election day. There was no news not related to the election that anybody read on Wednesday.
I know, but like no one gave me the day off and said like you don't have to write anything today. Yeah,
don't bother with any.
Yeah, like no one is going to read any of your stuff. No one said that. So we just did it anyway, and then in case you missed it,
we should have just this wallet where you could put your crypto would never fit in your pocket. Yeah, there we go. Jeff, what is your in case you missed it this week?
Well, we made a couple references to it. I actually picked one of our recent episodes of Security Breach, and this one was called The Little Things That Kill. We talked to Tom Marsland. He's the VP of Technology for CloudRange. CloudRange is a company that basically comes into your business and puts you into a cybersecurity range, presents a situation that you could encounter and says, how are you going to react? Whoa. Mm-hmm. And in going through these exercises with manufacturers, he's found, just as the title would sort of symbolize, it's a lot of the little stuff that manufacturers are still missing. whether it's login credentials that are not password 123, whether it is the way we respond to people, the way we're securing things up, the lack of visibility that we have to all of these different endpoints of data that we're accumulating as we connect to more and more stuff, and we're just not securing them the way that we should. And he points out just a number of small things that we can do to prevent these things from happening, like multi-factor authentication. Nobody likes doing that, but it can have huge impacts on your security. Being smarter with passwords, going through certain steps that when you have your IT department over here and your operational technology department over here, have them actually talk to each other about stuff as we're bringing in all this new Industry 4.0 technology and digital transformation. All of these little things we've been talking about for a long time, we're still struggling with.
Yeah.
So getting more of that dialogue going can go a long way. The other thing that he mentioned that I wanted to bring up was something that we talk about throughout manufacturing, not just cybersecurity, but he works with a company called VetSec, which, as you might detect, is veteran security type of agency. And basically what they do on a national and actually global stage is work with former military veterans to get them focused on these cybersecurity openings. All these jobs that are out there for cybersecurity that are going unfilled right now. A lot of times people don't even know they may need these individuals or that they're out there. But there are these, and you can pick whatever number you want. I've seen numbers as much as 250,000 cybersecurity openings that are unfilled right now. These are the types of organizations that are helping fulfill those openings. And when we look at the skills gap that we have throughout manufacturing, tapping into organizations like VetSec and others are a great resource. So there's a lot of good stuff in this episode that if you missed it, hopefully you can check out.
When it comes to the little things, I feel like, is it still the problem that kind of no one's going to target us? We're too small. They've got no, why would anyone ever come after us sort of thing as to why they don't button things up?
That's one of them.
Yeah.
The other thing is it's expensive and it's easier to avoid. And the other thing is it can be so daunting. Once you get in there, if you really let the whole threat landscape and your whole network and your whole OT infrastructure bog you down, you don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And that's where like some of the services like Cloud Range and others that are out there offer great perspective because they're like, hey, let's just start here.
Yeah.
Let's worry about the other stuff later, because at the end of the day, the harder you can make it for the hacker to get in, the more likely they are to give up and go someplace else.
Yeah. And I didn't know if you had a chance to read this story or check out the podcast. What are some of your thoughts? And I do think that we are making some progress when it comes to things like two-factor or double-factor authentication, just because we see a lot of times the technology has to be in our day-to-day life before we can then transition it to our professional life. And I think that because we're seeing more and more of that personally, maybe people are going to be a lot more receptive to it professionally.
Yeah. Yeah. Clicking on those traffic lights. Super receptive to that.
In which squares do you see a bus?
I can't remember what website it is that I use. And it makes you do that like 3 or 4 times. Have you ever done that?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
What?
The reCAPTCHA.
CAPTCHA.
Yeah.
CAPTCHA. What I took away from this most was that I think it's a good reminder that it's okay to ask for help with this stuff. Manufacturers, their core competency is making products. So you would never hesitate to seek out assistance in selling them, sell through distribution, for example, or to outsource your maintenance or something like that. Like cybersecurity to me is much the same. There's experts out there that, to your point, can come in and say, like, this is where we need to start. This is how we're going to get this off the ground. There's no reason to get overwhelmed by it. Ask an expert. They know what to do. So,
no, I think that's really good advice. Well, before we get out of here this week, let's jump into our final thoughts. Anna, do you want to start out? What's your final thought this week?
So we were gone all weekend. We went up to the Twin Cities to spend the weekend at Great Wolf Lodge, and we went to the Mall of America.
Oh, how was that?
With my kids for the first time.
Does that still have like Paw Patrol Land or whatever there?
Yeah, it's like Nickelodeonville or something.
Okay.
I don't know what it's called, but it's like Nickland.
Okay.
And so they have like a bunch of rides, none of which we did, but they have some very massive Lego sculptures,
very cool.
Which was very fun. But my favorite part about it was we had lunch at the Rainforest Cafe. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know those were still around.
So neither did I. My husband was like, I think there's a Rainforest Cafe at the mall. So we like made a reservation, which because it's crazy. It was a Saturday. And even as an adult, like it was like the most, I loved it. Like I was like, you guys look like because it was, all the animals, they're animatronic, or not all of them, but like they have animatronic like gorillas and stuff in there. And my kids thought it was amazing. And there was this weird fake thunderstorm in the middle of our meal that was a little bit scary for my friends that I had brought. But it was like just so much fun. And I was like, man, I want to eat here every day. Like it was fun to like go back in time. And I feel that way sometimes when I go to like Chuck E. Cheese too, where I'm just like, yes, this is still the best.
Yeah. No, Chuck E. Cheese has come a long way. They've really updated a lot of things, and it's really good time.
It's very fun.
I don't know what kind of Speedway points or grocery store points or whatever it was that were used to buy them, but for Christmas, for the better part of my childhood and into my teens, there was one relative in particular that always got me gift certificates to the Rainforest Cafe. And it was like an hour out away. But there was always like at least 1 or 2 times a year where it's like, we have to go. I have a stack of these. We got to go to the Rainforest Cafe. And I don't necessarily remember the food so much, but you're right. It's about the ambiance there. It's about
still works. You should go back. It was very fun.
It's about like eating in a white noise machine.
I know, it really was. It's so dark in there, and like
it's so dark.
We were throwing some coins into the pond, and the alligator, like its eye opens and closes, and it kind of moves a little bit. And my kids were like, "Is that a real alligator?"
Which probably moved way more than the alligators at the local zoo here in town, because I've been there many times. I don't think I've ever seen them move, let alone open an eye.
They never move.
No. It's just like, prove that's a real alligator to me.
Exactly.
My final thought this week is that it was an exciting week for many. It was a rough week for some, and that regardless of what side you're on, it's going to be okay. There are a lot of differences out there, but I think that when we talk to one another, we find out that we're a lot closer than a lot of people seem to think. And as we're making Thanksgiving plans, as we're making Christmas plans, let's not go and make some of those differences divide our families. Just because, again, I think, sometimes we become a little too divided, and no need to have that go severing families. So just, it's going to be okay, regardless of what side you're on. Jeff?
Yeah, speaking of the election, I had another one of those moments when I realized how getting to a different part of life, all 3 of my daughters voted. Oh, so I was very proud of them for that. But also it's like, man, all 3 are old enough to vote now. Wow. So this is a little crazy. So I enjoy these stories of your kids, because I can think back and sort of remember some of those things fondly, but also glad I don't have to maybe go through it again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was, it's wild how short or how quickly, there was no line. We were lucky there was no line, just kind of walked in, voted. But it is crazy how in between trying to fill in like 16 simple bubbles, how many times our littlest went back and forth between mommy and daddy. And it was like there were 2 people in between us. And I'm like, please just don't hit him. Please just don't bump into him. And the observers, the election observers were just kind of like staring at him. I'm like, and I even asked an election official, I'm like, I can have him here, right? Just because they're giving me the weird eye. And she's like, yeah, that's why we have stickers that say future voter. It's okay. It's okay.
It's okay.
But yeah, no, it was, so I definitely, man, I can't even think of a time when my kids will vote. It's scary.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, and you're talking about the water park and all that. I can remember those things and the trick-or-treating, and now they're adults voting in an election.
Trick-or-treating this year is bananas. People are way too generous. Way too generous.
The other thing, feeding off of if you need something to sort of, take a break, feel good about stuff. I don't know if you guys saw this, but there is a Reading Rainbow documentary on Netflix.
It is fantastic.
It's called Butterfly in the Sky.
It is fantastic.
It's it's about an hour and a half, so it's maybe a little bit long. But in terms of, I didn't realize first of all how long that show was on the air.
Yeah.
But also just going through in these people, it was started by a teacher who didn't know anything about TV, and goes through how it came together and LeVar Burton's role and the impact. It's just a cool story for something that, I remember plain as day growing up and watching and stuff like that. So highly recommend it. I know it's not, intensive investigative journalism that a lot of documentaries are, or something probing, and there's no negative, there's no dirt. It's just it's just a cool story about a kid's show that caught on and impacted a lot of people very, very positively. So definitely, I think, worth the watch.
And a couple of really cool points about that. Also, like, national treasure, LeVar Burton, national treasure. Cool. And I did like the story with the teacher where she's like, I want to make a TV show. I probably need TV people. And how they made the theme song, because that is one where, that's like a one note. You're automatically,
I can hear it right now.
Song.
Yeah.
And the other was, there's a manufacturing angle to it as well, because they were approaching publishers about being able to use their books as their featured book. Right, yeah. And everyone was just like, no.
How is that going to help us?
How would that possibly help us? And then that Reading Rainbow stamp on the front of books wound up being like the first Oprah book club, where they couldn't even keep them in print. And the other thing that I liked was, especially with kids our age, Anna, is that I got every book they mentioned in that documentary I got from the library and we read. They're just, fantastic.
Very cool.
No, great recommendation. All right. Well, before we get out of here this week, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Anna, David, or Jeff at IN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You could also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Subscribe to us on YouTube at IN Magazine so you can join us when we go live every Thursday. And, subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Anna Wells and Jeff Franke, I'm David Manty. This is the Today in Manufacturing podcast, and we will see you next week.